And yeah, sometimes when you come out of the right corner, you don't win right away because there's all this other stuff going on. But you sleep at night, you know? You know what you're doing. You know, you're not selling out. You're not compromising. I mean, he used to tell me, he said they can cheat you, but they can't beat you. And he said if they cheat you, he said it's only a short time before that's undone, or they undo themselves.
That would have crushed most people. I mean, all your life, everything you did, you finally got on top, you thought everything was fine. Something completely out of your control happens and takes it all away.
He was always positive. No matter how bad things got, he was always positive and always just knew things were going to work out.
I remember his smile, and he always seemed happy. I know he had different things on his mind, but he always seemed happy. He did. He had the biggest smile.
You know how they used to always love to spend time in St. Martin? That was your Gramps' paradise over there. And they would talk about friends that they met that worked at the condos they stayed at. When I went with Gaga after your Gramps passed, some of the natives that worked at those condos would come up to me with tears in their eyes, telling me how special your Gramps was. The magnitude, I thought he was special, but everybody thought he was special,
I wanted to move home, and that was in 78. And I remember Dad saying, you can't. There's no jobs. I mean, there's nothing here.
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, it was devastating. And, I mean, that wasn't the first blow he had. I mean, look, he was with Sherman, Rife, and Bennett. He was the principal owner. These guys were freaking famous. Bennett was a famous manager of the Cincinnati Reds. I mean, at the time, people all over the country knew this guy, okay? He was a larger-than-life type character, okay? Vern Rife, he was Speaker of the House for 36 consecutive years. You know how freaking hard that is? He was the one that ran their day-to-day operation and everything that he was Vern's first campaign manager. Bennett himself, later in his life, towards the end of his life, I saw him at the dairy bar in Sciotoville one time. He came in and I said hello to him. I said, "Hey, Gene, how you doing?" He was sitting there by himself. He was a widow by that time. And it was kind of sad because you were sitting there thinking that, that's Gene Bennett. I mean, he is like a legend of the Cincinnati Reds. And, you're thinking that was so long ago. People don't even know who he is. He's a widower. He's sitting in Sciotoville, you know what I mean? And he calls me over and he said, "Tim, can you come over and sit down with me for a minute?" So I'm like, "Sure, Gene." So, I go over there and he said, "I want to tell you something." And I'm thinking he's going to tell me one of his usual stories, which always involves a lot of drinking in Cincinnati Reds and some party or something. But he says, and this is after my dad had passed. He'd been gone for a couple of years. He said, "I've known a lot of great men in baseball, in business, all my travels." He said, "But your dad was the top 5 greatest men I ever knew."
I remember my father, I was trying to think of some stories the other day when I talked to you, but one of the first things I remember about him was he had me on one arm, he had Tom on the other arm, and he's carrying upstairs to bed. He always had a wristwatch on, he had that Mason's ring he always wore. Smelled a little bit like cigarettes and probably a beer. Dad worked 12, 14, 16 hours a day. Mom worked 24 hours a day. Dad's insurance career started out in the front room of our house up on Woodland, about 1953. He had been working at Williams shoe factory, and he decided to take a part-time job with one of the local insurance agents, Carl Murphy, who, Dad made more in 2 weeks when he finally got in the insurance business than he made all year at Williams. So, I remember, I was really little back then, but I remember when things first started out with Mom and Dad. I mean, they lived pretty much like everybody else in Sciotoville, everybody else on that block. Things were kind of tight. One day, I think in 1958 or 59, there was a brand new red Chrysler out in front of the house, with the push-button transmission. And, I'm thinking, wow, that's not like that little... I think Dad had a Crosley before that. It looked like a clown car, and it had the insurance agency's advertising on the outside of it. And all of a sudden he comes home with this, and, we're thinking... And at the time, I remember Dad telling me about it. In 1953, he was born in 26. So he'd have been 27 years old.
Wow.
I guess what I'm saying is he started the agency in our front room. He had it remodeled. He had the porch built in. Sherman Insurance was in our front room. He hired Anna Lou Walker, Scott Walker was one of my best friends. Anna Lou worked for WWII for years after they merged. And, for 2 years had his business, or really more than that, from 53 to about 55, 56.
Well, I'm Sally Sherman Bias. With the Sherman Cricker Insurance Agency, which is the agency that Mom and Dad started in 1978. I've been here since 1986. Yeah, of course, Gramps got his license back in the 50s. He kind of did it part-time for a while. He was like running a milk route for Lawson Dairy, and he got his agent's license. And he was just a natural at it. You know how Gramps was. He just was a real people person, great salesman. I remember him telling me that when they made it mandatory to have auto insurance in the state of Ohio, that he would just hang out at the BMV when everybody had to come in and get their tags and stuff and just write people policies left and right. And he said, I think he worked for John Emmert, which is one of the original people at Barrett Murphy Agency.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then he met a guy named Vern Rife Jr. Dad knew his father, Mayor Rife, who was the mayor of New Boston at the time, and actually he said something about helping Junior out, see, Junior might be interested in the insurance business. So Dad kind of was a favor to his dad. Him and Vern became partners. About 1957 is when Vern decided to run for state representative. At that time, Dad told me, he wasn't really too worried about that. I mean, Dad was all about work, all about sharing the load. When Vern came to him about that, Dad was just looking at it as a part. At that time, the legislature was just a part-time job. So Vern would only be going in the summer, and then he'd be back the rest of the year, and Dad thought this was going to be a good generator for business for us, that's what he's thinking, it's going to be really good for business. So even though Vern was a Democrat and Dad was a Republican, he was his first campaign manager. And
he, by all accounts was the principal owner and main guy in that insurance agency. And, I'm not knocking, the former speaker, Vern Rife, or Bennett, because
was he around a lot, Dad? Vern Rife, or
well, he ran back and forth to Columbus and came in about once a week, and Dad would say he came in, blew around, and Dad would spend the next 2 days straightening things out. Dad didn't pull any punches. He really liked Vern, but he called bullshit, and that's all there was to it. And he'd tell anybody, that asked.
Gene Bennett didn't come in till I guess it was the 60s too, and that's why Dad back at that time was interested in trying to get people in that had good names or something he thought could draw. Gene was a scout for the Reds, so Dad's looking at that again. I think Gene will be good for business because he's got a lot of contacts that are outside this area, and well, that turned out that Gene really didn't bring anything into the agency. He drew a salary and spent all his time scouting for the Reds. So Dad basically had a three-way agency, and he was the only one doing the work. And he continued on that up until about 70. I'm trying to think, 73 or 74. And then I think he was kind of thinking he could talk to Vern about maybe, either picking up the slack a little bit, or they got to do something. It was getting to the point where he was realizing he was doing all the work and still only taking a third of the proceeds. So he went to Vern, and I think he thought that Vern wouldn't do it, but he said something about, we got to do something. If we can't work it out, we're going to have to talk about a buyout. And Vern said, I'll buy you out. And I think Dad was a little surprised by that. I don't think he really wanted to quit, but he did. He sold out to Vern, signed a no compete, got into a couple financial deals. One was the Mobile Home Acceptance Corporation, which was a finance outfit for mobile home dealers. It was very lucrative. At one point, people don't believe this, but Dad had a Cherokee 6 out at the airport. He went in partners with the guy. They had their own little plane. They were going all around the nation. That's when finance was a big deal, Jimmy Carter got to be president, and the credit just dried up. Inflation hit. Interest rates went through the roof. You couldn't get credit. So when you're in the business of securing credit lines for dealers, and all of a sudden you can't secure it anymore, you're out of business. Multi-million-dollar corporations out of business overnight. That happened a lot back in the 70s, during the Carter presidency. Dad pretty much lost his ass. He was living in the house up on the hill then. I don't know. I'm sure you guys know it. That wasn't the first time they lived there when you guys know. They had bought that house, pretty much had to sell it, because he couldn't pay for it anymore, and moved out to the farm. And then they stayed in the farm for, until Dado passed away. That's probably the darkest time of his life. Or one of the darkest times I remember him going through, because he really did have some problems, and that's the only time I ever saw him cry. He was up in his den up on the hill, and I wasn't into business with him or anything else. I was just married, and I think I was working in construction or something, just really excited that Dad and Mom had to do the house, so I'm happy for him and everything. I went in there and saw him, and he didn't tell me what was going on. You know, Dad wouldn't share that part of it, but I know within a month, you know, we were getting the house, you know, getting things ready to build him a house out on the, or set a double wide out on the farm and move him out of there. And
what happened was, he's about 8 years into that no-compete. He's got that trailer sales up in Wheelersburg. He develops Crestview Mobile Home Park, which is still up in Wheelersburg, and it's still one of the nicest places. And I believe it firmly it's because of the rules they set in place on how you had to have your place and everything else, because he got criticized for that too, because they're like, oh, it's going to be a bunch of trashy mobile homes. That's still probably a super nice place to live to this day. And but what happened was the guy that was running his setups and day-to-day operations, from what I could take, I mean, I was 11, 12 years old running around there. The guy went bad, and he did a bunch of things that by the time Dad found out what was going on, they were already, I mean, businesses run on the wire down here, most businesses. Meaning if they make a mistake, you know, it could be fatal 3 months later, you know, I mean, because that's about how long it takes their cash flow to catch up with them. And at that time, you know, everything was on the books, and, you know, your only accounting was whoever was doing the bookkeeping. And the guy's wife was doing the bookkeeping, and they lived down there. So from what I could take, because everything was moved out of there really quickly, this guy and his wife were moved out of there really quickly. And I remember being down there with my dad, picking up some smaller stuff, and him telling me, you know, buddy, I mean, they went bad, and it took the business down. But he took personal credit because he always felt like he should have known that.
Yeah.
That he should have known more of what's going on. But, you know, that can happen.
Everything he had going on.
Short of the story is they lost the business. He had another business deal fall through. We had something called the Great Recession happening. You know, they had all this money wrapped up in land that nobody would buy. So he had a lot of property. You know, he was property rich and dollar poor, you know. And so the mobile home business had to go. The house up on the hill, which was his prized possession that him and Gaga had designed and built, and like absolutely never thought in a million years they would ever move, it had to be sold. And, you know, I mean, on top of it, you know, he had to move up to Wheelersburg, which is not torture, but at that time it felt like it, you know, beside his dad, who, I mean, he loved his father, but he had issues with him. And then on top of it, the house we lived in was the model modular home from the mobile home. That was all that was left. So we had to live in one of those modular homes, which is not torture. I mean, they're super nice, but when you come from like a custom built luxury house, one of a kind that nobody had ever seen before, and then have to move to, you know, basically a piece of equipment from your business that went under. You know, I mean, I guess I could kind of understand. I mean, I've had to live in my van and truck a few times. I mean, it's not exactly what you want to do. You know, I've had these conversations with Nick, and he always thinks, you know, it's, you know, I mean, sometimes things can go bad, man, and I mean, for no apparent reason. And I mean, it's like a test, but the test just keeps getting worse. It's like Murphy's Law. It like, things can happen so ridiculous, and I mean, you know, so I guess it all matters, you know, what's your reaction, you know, does it do you in? Do you mope around? And, you know, very calm and steady. I mean, he was coming up on a deal that he'd been waiting for years, and he was able to get back in the insurance business. And that's what he wanted. But I mean, the road just started again then, you know. I mean, here he is at, I mean, by that time he was my age, you know. He was 55, 56 years old. Time when you think you should be like, I mean, at that time, conventionally speaking, most people were retiring. You know, they'd already worked 35, 40 years. But instead, he was starting all over brand new.
You know, that would have crushed most people. I mean, you know, all your life, everything you did, you finally got on top, you thought everything was fine. Something completely out of your control happens and takes it all away. In 1939 or 79, when I started with them, even before that, the year before that, you know, we never missed a payroll. I mean, anybody that worked for that agency always got paid. And I found out, you know, that year that sometimes the principals don't get paid, but the whole point of that business was take care of your people and make sure they did. I remember when I went in there was probably the worst possible time I could have gone, because Dad found out that a lot of the stock and stuff that they had declared on the books when he bought it, they had stolen. It wasn't there anymore. So he, you know, he was like another 100, 150 grand in the hole. Once he found there were accounts on his book of business that insurance agency had been run absentee, and basically people hadn't paid insurance for years because the agency would just, they didn't even bill. They were just, you know, the count curtain would come in, they'd pay it. They wouldn't check off to see who paid or anything else. So it was really a mess. I mean, I you know, I thought Dad he had already lost everything, and what little we had, he put back into it, and now, you know, it's all going to go to hell. I remember going over to the bank with him, and he just told me, he said, son, we're going to have to get some more financing or we're shot. And we went to the bank, and, you know, number one, Dad did Harry Keener a favor by picking up that piece of shit agency, because they were going to have to declare, you know, write it off. He went back to get the money from him, and Harry loaned him the money, but the last thing he said to Dad before he left, he said, well, I guess you're done trying to be a millionaire now. And yeah, but Dad does have a temper. I've seen it raised a few times, but I right then I thought, shit, this is it. You know, better get my carpenter tools back out, because the loan's going to go right out the door with that guy's teeth. And he just walked up to Harry and looked at him and put his hand out, and Harry put his hand out, and I couldn't, you know, he didn't say anything, but Dad was gripping his hand so hard that old Harry's face turned red. And he just, thank you, Harry, and we got the money. But at that time, I mean, you know, Mom and Dad were paying me, they were paying everybody else, so they couldn't even take a check themselves.
Well, I mean, Tony, despite all those circumstances, like, what's amazing is when I was growing up, like they had such a meteoric rise. Like, what you all did with the business clearly worked out.
Dad was so gung ho, he was infectious, and that time in my life, I was young, and, you know, really we were fighting for survival. But a few things, you know, Dad's always had a good gut feeling. I mean, his gut on business was amazing. He was a figures man and could do the figures and stuff, but most important to him was his gut. And I don't think it was ever wrong, you know, as far as the business was concerned. But he, you know, we got into a few programs. We had a few companies that came to us at just the right time. I mean, he was a star of Buckeye. They came out with a combination policy before they used to bundle policies. You know, back in the early '80s, Buckeye came out with one of the first bundles, and Dad, our little agency, which wasn't even probably a $200,000 agency at that time, was producing more of those packages than anybody in the whole company. And that, you know, it was a regional company. And they couldn't figure out how we were doing it, and it was Dad's marketing. Of course, there wasn't a day went by I didn't have at least 5 or 6 appointments. And I think the first year we wrote 350 or 400 policies for that company, and they were amazed. They were sending people down to try to get our method and stuff, and it really wasn't a method as much as just get her done.
Yeah.
But Dad just he was just enthusiastic about it, and he inspired everybody else. And yeah, that agency, if you really knew, if you thought we were starting out at zero and he did what he did, it would have been amazing. But then when you find out he was probably another 150 or 200 grand down back at that time.
It must have been like 94. All of a sudden, Dad figured out that the house on the hill was listed again, and nothing would do him except to buy that house and move back up there. So, they got home. They were thrilled. All the trees that they had planted were, mature, and they saw it was a great house. They were happy to be back up there.
I know it's a kind of tall order.
Or remember Mom painted had the top, she cracked one of the tiles in the kitchen, and she had someone paint like a broken china plate over top of it, so it looked like one of her blue dishes was laying on the floor broken, but it was really just that cracked tile do you remember that?
I do.
He stayed. A lot of that, I was so young, I wasn't hands-on, but Dad was involved in a little bit of everything. Him, and I know Bob Deaver was involved in it, a lot of people from Sciotoville, and some people from Wheelersburg sold all the bonds and got the idea to build Tanland Pool. Of course, he took the first shovel full of dirt, when they started digging it. I know he was in the Lions Club and Rotary and Chamber of Commerce. He was president of Chamber of Commerce a few times. He was on the PIC board, the Private Industry Council. He was chairman of it for a long, long time. He used to be, I know when I was little, he was really active in the Republican Party. In fact, he ran on a Republican ticket for county commissioner one year, I think in 71 or 72. And all the little pennies that keep me in, and you'll always have good luck. You got one of those, don't you? People bring those to me all the time. They'll be cleaning out drawers, or especially people my age, that maybe a parent will pass, or they'll be at an older person's home, and they'll be cleaning out stuff, and they'll come across a bunch of those Don Sherman for county commissioner pennies.
I am Dad's first daughter, Sue Howard, now at this point, but I am the oldest daughter. I retired from the state of Ohio. I worked for the Ohio Division of Wildlife. When I retired, I was the assistant chief over operations and communications and all the fiscal and budget type stuff. I always kind of thought that Dad had a lot to do with why I was able to do what I did in the division, which was mostly male dominated. And for me, being a woman, I was one of the first women to hit senior staff, and I was the first woman assistant chief, and then I was acting chief. So but a lot of it had to do with Dad and just the way I was brought up, that I could do anything I wanted to do, and that I was just as I could do anything a man could do.
His business.
I always knew that he was in the insurance business. He was also very much into kind of local politics as far as city council and that type of thing. But I remember always knowing that he was a businessman. He dressed up in his suit, and he always looked so handsome in his suit and businesslike. And we used to go in with him sometimes on Saturdays. So I knew he worked in an office, that kind of thing. I knew that he sold insurance because people would call a lot at home. When we would answer the phone, we would always have to make sure that we took a message, that kind of thing. Even as a young kid, you knew when you answered the phone that you had to be, you couldn't act, silly, that you had to pick it up. You had to find out, because it could be for Dad, and it could be a business call for Dad, that kind of thing. And that house that you were talking about, we're at the pool and we all hung out together, and I'm sure you have a lot of fond memories, and so do my kids, and so do I, But when he first built that house, Dad was so proud of that house. It was in 1974 that we moved in, and he was always bringing people to the house to give them a tour of the house. And I'm sure you saw that even when you were young. I mean, there was always people coming and walking through the house. So Dad, there were times, Connor, that I would be asleep. I was in high school. I would be sound asleep in bed. Dad would come home at night and have someone with him, and he would decide to give a tour of the house. And he would come in, turn on the light. Here I am asleep in the bed. It'd be like, oh my God. And I'd hear Dad, he'd go, well, this is my daughter Sue's room. And my room back then was all purple walls, purple carpet.
Which one was it, Sue?
It was the first one at the top of the steps to the left. It was the very first one. And I mean, deep purple carpet, deep purple walls. He would come in and he'd go, this is my daughter Sue's room. That's my daughter. She's asleep. She loves purple. I can remember it. I'd be going, oh my God, I'm asleep. Putting a pillow over my head. But that was Dad. He loved that house. He loved to introduce people to his kids, and his family.
My name's Tom Sherman, Thomas Lee Sherman. I was born May 21st, 1953 in Portsmouth, Ohio. Well, Dad always had this thing that I was going to be an attorney, and Tony was going to be a doctor, of all things. And I'm always thinking to myself, yeah, you can say that, but there's no way I'm going to go to law school and become an attorney. And then after I discovered there was nothing I could do with my degree in psychology without going back to school for a master's and a doctorate, which was probably going to be another 7 years worth of school, I suddenly just broke down and said, hate to admit it, but Dad's right. I guess I'm going to go to law school. So that was me. And then later it was Sue got a job for the state. She ended up retiring from the state. She worked at the Division of Reclamation and then at the Division of Wildlife for almost 30 years. Your dad obviously worked at the State House for a number of years. So it was kind of the jobs ticket.
Pizza. Why did Gramps always want to go get the pizza instead of deliver it?
Basically, and it took me a long time to figure that out, but basically, well, first of all, there weren't many pizza places at that point in time, period. So it was a big treat to get a pizza. And so it was always, Dad worked through the week, so it was always on a Saturday that he'd want to go get pizza. And we'd be all excited. Come on, Tom, why don't you ride with me? Okay, that sounds good. Why don't we call it in, Dad? Oh, no, it's best if you order it when you get there. And it's like, well, why wouldn't we just call it in? I'm telling you, son, it's better if you order it when you get there. And why was because he basically could have a drink or two while he waited for the pizza. So if he would have ordered it, would have gone down to pick it up, it would have been ready, and we'd have had to go straight home. This way he could sit at the bar and have a drink, probably talk to some of his buddies, and enjoy himself, and then go home and eat pizza.
I'm Mary Race. Right now I am part owner of Market Street Cafe, and previously worked at WWII Insurance until the late 2006, and then we started the cafe. Right at that time, yeah. And I just loved them both. I mean, you know, they were always good to me. Both of them are always good to me, and we were very good to them as far as loyal employees, you know. And I said sometimes, you know, we might talk a half hour in the afternoon and not do much, but if we needed to, we'd stay till 7 o'clock too. You know, it was just we had a very good relationship with both of them.
But my dad was just a epic character. I mean, everybody knew him. You know, everybody loved him for the most part, and the people that didn't, they respected him because he did what he said, and that was the bottom line. I mean, if his word was his bond, and I mean, he always told me, and I didn't listen to him until later in life, but he always told me, he's like, you've got to take a break. He's like, you've got to work really hard, extraordinarily hard. He said, but you have to take those breaks, because if you don't, you can't sustain it. And that's what we did. And I mean, it was always a big deal. I mean, everything he did was involved like wanting the family to be together and everybody to be happy. And you know, I mean, he was like that. It was, you know.
I felt that in my childhood too. Just
Oh, absolutely.
Had a place for us.
That's right. Well, and that's why they had that house with the pool and everything, is because they wanted everybody to come. I mean, it wasn't a competition for them, but if it was, they would have kicked ass. I mean, because they wanted everybody there, you know? I mean, and that's, it wasn't about having it their way. It was about having a place where everybody could be and everybody could be happy. And that's probably what made, from what I could see, brought him the most joy in his life. And that's what we did. And I mean, it was always a big deal. I mean, everything he did was involved like wanting the family to be together and everybody to be happy. And you know, I mean, he was like that. It was, you know.
I felt that in my childhood too. Just
Oh, absolutely.
Had a place for us.
That's right. Well, and that's why they had that house with the pool and everything, is because they wanted everybody to come. I mean, it wasn't a competition for them, but if it was, they would have kicked ass. I mean, because they wanted everybody there, you know? I mean, and that's, it wasn't about having it their way. It was about having a place where everybody could be and everybody could be happy. And that's probably what made, from what I could see, brought him the most joy in his life.
And I see their values. I see it in you. You know, I see it in your brother Nick. I see him in my son Patrick. Some of you have different aspects of it, but, you know, I see a lot of my dad in all three of you boys. Different pieces of him. And he'd be so proud of you.